Thanks for choosing us. We go straight into our stories now. And government is considering the takeover of the National Investment Bank by ADB Bank. The move is part of proposed measures to help save the troubled financial institution. This is what Joy Business has picked up from persons working on this transaction. George Riafe has the rest of the story.
Joy Business understands that government hasn't made a definite decision yet when it comes to the takeover of NIB by ADB, but this is highly under consideration. This is because this is part of several options being considered to turn around the National Investment Bank, NIB. Sources say ADB itself may need some additional financial support to undertake this takeover, looking at the current state of NIB. We also understand that government has gotten to that stage where it claims it cannot continue to extend financial support to the National Investment Bank. Some persons close to NIB have also argued that the takeover is not the best option. This is because they have proposed several measures to turn around the bank. Some include a 2.2 billion Ghana cedis capital injection to turn around the bank, so that floating of shares to raise additional funds to recapitalize the National Investment Bank. Some of these persons have also argued that NIB itself has taken some steps internally which is yielding some positive results. While developments in the coming days will reveal how things will proceed when it comes to the takeover of NIB by ADB and whether it will come on or not.
But financial economist Professor Lord Mensah doesn't think this approach is the best option to turn around the National Investment Bank.
To see ADB to have that kind of strong financial muscle to absorb, NIB. If you look at NIB's balance sheet, clearly you could see that most of their loans, that are impaired are with contractors who are working for government. And so it's kind of a cycle that has, weakened NIB. And I believe ADB being a government, bank, also government-oriented bank, is also in the same, situation. So putting the two together is more or less a way of continuing, with a weakness. So for me, it's not the best option. What government can do is to get an external investor to put money into NIB, to revive NIB.
Moving on, Ghana Cocoa Board has announced that the 2023-2024 cocoa crop season will start from this week, Friday, September 9, as against the initial date of October 1. The decision was taken due to recent disruption in the internal marketing of cocoa, as well as to safeguard the interest of cocoa farmers. Bloomberg has also warned that the country could record its worst harvest in 13 years. The following report has more.
Already, Ghana is said to have missed the production targets set for the 2022-2023 crop season due to bad weather and the outbreak of swollen shoot virus disease in top-growing cocoa regions, including the Western North. According to Bloomberg, the country could make its lowest harvest in 13 years, a development that could affect income from the export of the commodity. The Ghana Cocoa Board has in recent times struggled to fulfill some cocoa contracts, forcing Cocoa Board to postpone the supply of about 44,000 metric tons of cocoa beans for future harvest. It is expected that government will on Friday announce pragmatic measures to address the challenges in the sector, including smuggling.
Now, the National Pensions Regulatory Authority says it supports proposals for workers' contribution to the SNIT scheme to be increased. It follows concerns about the sustainability of the scheme if drastic measures are not taken to review contributions. Although Chief Executive of the NPRA, Hayford Atakofi, says retirement age of 60 years can only be revised upward by government and parliament.
If you look at our 5-year development plan for the pensions industry, one key area is the sustainability of the basic National Social Security Scheme, of course. And so for us as regulators, even the 3-year interval that the actuarial evaluation is done, we think is too long. We think that every year, so the SNIT will have to let us know what is going on and what we need to do. So one of the things, for example, that we are working with SNIT to ensure sustainability is to look at their investment guidelines, for example, so that we can restructure investment. Because when we talk about sustainability of a scheme, it is how the scheme funds are being invested and how it is turning out, and to ensure that they will be able to pay benefit. So it's one of those things that we as regulators are working with them on. When it comes to age of joining and age of leaving a scheme, those are determined by law. Act 766 talks about joining at 15. We all know that relative people hardly, for example, start work at 15 in our country, maybe 18, maybe 21, so on and so forth. Those things, because they are determined by law, that's how it should be. The 60 years is predetermined by the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, and it's an entrenched clause, for example. So it would not be part of our regulatory responsibility to amend or even talk about it.
Let's go on Zoom now and speak to Professor Elikplim Agboyo on these issues. Prof, thank you so much for your time here. Are you worried about the ongoing discussions about the sustainability of the SNIT pension scheme?
Okay, good evening, Beverly, and good evening to your cherished viewers. Well, I think that there are conversations that we need to have. First of all, I'll explain what pension liabilities are and how those liabilities are met. So basically what pension funds do is that they take contributions from employees and employers, and these contributions then represent a liability for the pension funds, because when the employee retires, they expect the pension fund to make payments to them upon retirement. So those payments represent a liability of the pension fund. Now, to meet that liability, the pension fund invests in assets like shares, like treasury bonds, like treasury bills, like real estate, etc., to generate sufficient returns to make the pension payments or to meet their pension liabilities. So basically, that is how pensions will work. So like I mentioned earlier, it's an important conversation for us to have. But I think there are other things that we need to discuss. Okay, what are the returns on the investments of these pension funds? If pension funds are able to earn sufficient returns, make high returns, invest optimally, a conversation on increasing the contribution for pensions may not be necessary. Okay, so one, we need to look at the efficiency of their investments. We need to look at the efficiency of their operations. Okay, if they are operating at very high cost, again, that reduces the amount that can go to pension there. So the efficiency of the management of these pension funds are also extremely important. In terms of the performance of their assets, which is one of the key things to determine the sustainability of a fund, the macroeconomy is also important. So last year, this year, we've seen that if the economy is not doing well, it has a big impact on pension funds. Particularly the domestic debt exchange program has affected pension funds severely. And that is one of the things contributing to the unsustainability of pension funds today, where their assets may not be enough to meet their pension liabilities.
Right. There are proposals that workers' contributions to the SNIT pension scheme should be increased to deal with this challenge. Good, bad, or should it not be entertained? Where do you stand?
So like I said, I'm trying to look at alternatives. So if the pension funds can actually invest well and generate sufficient returns, we don't need to increase pension contributions. If they can manage the operations very well, we don't need to increase pension contributions. If they enforce, i.e. ensure that the contributions that employers have taken to pay on behalf of employees are done, again, we may not need to increase pension contributions. And increasing pension contributions now may be something that may be difficult for employees to swallow, especially given the current economic challenges.
But do you think the economy in the next 5 years can sustain this proposal?
Given the challenges we are going through, increasing the contributions now will be very difficult for employees to actually take on board. And I foresee that labor unions may probably actually agitate against an increase in pension contributions at this moment.
Right, let's look at the increase in the retirement age from the current 60 years to also help sustain the scheme. Is it a prudent idea?
Well, it's an option, but I think we need to look at a number of things as well. Right. Okay, life expectancy in Ghana is not very high. Most people die around age 60, 65. So if you are increasing the retirement age to 65, what does it mean for people? It may mean that people will literally be working till they die. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. Okay, so that's one thing we need to look at, or one scenario we need to take into consideration. Another factor is that we have a very high youth unemployment rate. And when people retire, in a sense, it creates space for our younger people to join the workforce. So those are some of the things we need to take into account in deciding whether or not we want to increase the retirement age. I don't know if they want to increase it to 65, 70. It's one option, is feasible, but I think that if we look at other things like increasing how well the funds are invested and how efficient these funds are, that may go a long way in increasing the sustainability of pension funds in Ghana.
Right, let's shift from pensions. Now, West African Central Bank governors and finance ministers in the ECOWAS region have converged in Accra to try and finalize work on the introduction of the single currency, the ECO. Now, do you think the introduction of the ECO will ever come to pass?
Well, we all don't know the future with certainty. I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. I don't see it happening soon, but I think that in the medium to long term is possible. Right. For you to have a common currency, countries should be at similar levels, so we call convergence criteria. So, for example, similar levels of inflation. Some countries don't have high fiscal deficits, etc. So we need to be sure that countries are meeting the necessary convergence criteria. Again, we've seen a lot of political unrest in the region recently, from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, etc. And I'm wondering whether this is a good time to accelerate the introduction of the ECO. But I think that is something that is important in the medium to long term. If we have a common currency, it has benefits for all of us. It promotes trade and reduces the cost of business operations for businesses. And that would also provide a bigger market for our businesses where they can export to other countries in the ECOWAS region without currency conversion concerns.
Right. Well, finally, before I let go of you, what do you make of the argument that some countries should take the lead and others join later?
Well, it is feasible. I think if you look at the Euro projects in the European Union, some countries started, others joined later. So maybe those countries that are ready, who have met the convergence criteria, they could start and then others come on board later. So that's a feasible way to proceed.
Right. We'll leave it here. Thank you so much, Professor Eniklim Agloyo, for your time here on Business Live. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta says government is working to raise $1 billion funding to support the Bank of Ghana's balance of payments by the end of the year. The move, according to him, will address issues confronting the central bank and the banking sector at large. Mr. Ofori-Atta said his outfit is working to meet all the requirements necessary for the release of the second tranche of the IMF funds. He was speaking at the Ghana Investment Promotion Centre's CEO's breakfast meeting.
The breakfast meeting brought together CEOs across various sectors of the economy to deliberate on ways to increase investment for private sector growth. Mr. Ofori-Atta said his hope for Ghana will pass the next IMF review this month to pave way for the release of the second tranche of funding. He stated that this will put the country in a better position to attract more investors to partner local businesses.
There are a lot of conditions to be met, but that's what we are here for. What you call performance indicators. So the quantitative qualitative performance indicators, about 6 of them, indicative targets, about 3, and then some structural benchmarks. But I think with all of that, we've got a long way to be ready for the mission that comes at the end of September, so that we can try and get a staff level agreement while the mission is here, and then go to the board in November for the release of the second tranche, which will be $600 million. In addition to that, certain things we also need to do with the World Bank, so that we can get our DPO, which will be another $300 million. So I believe that we are on course to maybe get $1 billion by year end to support the Bank of Ghana's balance of payments issues.
On its part, the Chief Executive Officer for the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, Yofi Grant, said his outfit is working to attract more foreign direct investment. He also called for more public-private partnerships.
What, for me, it's the important part is the partnership with private sector. That the public sector supports the private sector to grow. That is key. If that happens, and the Director General of the SIGA did mention, but he did say that his core mandate is to ensure that public sector performs in accordance with our desires to make sure that the private sector can perform well.
The breakfast meeting was held under the theme Public-Private Partnerships, Bridging the Gap for Inclusive and Sustainable Economic Development.
Now, the Economist Intelligence Unit is warning Ghana and some other African countries that headline inflation will remain high, fueling public discontent in 2023 and 2024. In its Africa's Operational Risk Outlook, the UK-based firm said the elevated headline inflation will be driven by high global commodity and food prices, local currency weakness against the US dollar, among others. Here's more.
The report said inflation continues to run high as subsidy regimes buckle under the fiscal strain. This will fuel public dissatisfaction over worsening living conditions and could manifest itself in the form of frustration against affluent foreigners and attacks on private property. Additionally, a continued sharp rise in price growth could result in a decline in living standards and an increase in public frustration as wages have not risen as quickly as inflation across the region. This makes it harder for poorer households to purchase basic staples. ERU furthered that the situation is crucial against a backdrop of entrenched widespread poverty and high unemployment across most parts of Africa. It added that protests could push workers employed by large manufacturers to coordinate large-scale strikes to demand salary increases.
Now, with businesses having to grapple with the high cost of doing business as a result of some economic pressures, some are also faced with other operational costs. According to the Chief Executive of Doman Foods, Francis Kofiga, employee wages have also become a major source of worry for many businesses. He was speaking at a forum on entrepreneurial journeys organized by the Ghana Communication Technology University.
The Industrial Liaison Department of the Ghana Communication Technology University organized a forum to instill entrepreneurial mindsets in students. This has become critical due to the increasing number of graduate unemployment in the country. In an interview, Chief Executive of Doman Foods, Francis Kofiga, lamented the high cost of doing business, adding that employee wages are becoming a major source of worry for most employers.
The cost of doing business in Ghana is an interesting one. From the taxes you pay to the high rise of goods and services, prices just change. Prices just change anyhow. And then there's also another part that is not said, that is employees and their wages. Like people hardly talk about it, but because of the terrain that we are living in, economy that we are living in, the employees also need raise. They also need more money, and so to incentivize them or to motivate them, the money must also go up. And so it makes cost of doing business interesting. But I like to look at it from a different angle rather. I look at it and I say, if problems don't come to you, like there's a book entitled "The Obstacle Is the Way." It says, until there are obstacles, you don't develop muscles to become bigger.
Assistant Registrar at the university, Gloria Adle-Susu, urged the students to carve business ideas that are scalable and impactful to society.
What you have to do, find the problem, is right around you. When you find the problem, you need to develop the idea. Sometimes we rush into getting the idea materializing. You have to first of all see if the problem you have, like the CEO of Doman said, if somebody will be willing to pay for that product or that service. If somebody is willing to pay, then you go further to find out, is somebody willing to sponsor this idea? Is this idea sustainable? Is this idea unique?
The students were also encouraged to constantly acquire new skills that would help sustain their businesses.
That's how we end Business Live tonight. For more business news, you can log on to myjoyonline.com/business. I am Beverly Broom. Do enjoy the rest of our programs.